So we have Amanda here today, and we're going to talk about mental health. So figured we would just ask you, since you kind of work in that area, maybe could you explain your role actually?
Yeah, like what I do for a living.
Yeah.
So I'm a nurse practitioner, and I work out at the Lindner Center of Hope in Mason, Ohio, which is a freestanding mental health facility.
That's awesome.
And we see people of all ages, every diagnosis you can think of, every level of care that exists. And as a nurse practitioner, I function essentially as a psychiatrist. So I have my own caseload of patients. I assess, I diagnose, I treat, I prescribe, I put together a treatment plan for folks. And most of the time it's pretty rewarding,
Right.
but there are also some days where it's really challenging.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool. So our first question is, considering that there are very few people who are untouched by this impact of mental health and the issues, why do you think people can feel isolated or alone because of their own struggle?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. It's a really interesting question because this is something that I talk to my patients about. There are a lot of lies that depression and anxiety tell us, and one of these lies is that we are alone, that we're the only one going through this struggle, that nobody else could possibly understand.
Right.
And so I think people feel isolated because their depression lies to them and tells them that they are alone in their struggle. I think also, though, we tend to, when we're sad, we withdraw from others. So in that way, we isolate, and that's kind of on us. So one of the things I'll try and coach my patients on is like reach out to people. You know, don't withdraw, don't hide your struggle, don't hide your pain, because if you open up to somebody, chances are they will tell you they have been through something similar,
Right.
and then you have a connection with that person, and then you won't feel quite so alone.
So how do you respond when someone tells you that God has a plan and a purpose for your life? And then is there anything that keeps you from believing this?
Like me personally, like
Yeah.
when someone tells me God has a plan for my life, I'll say, yes, I know. I feel like God has a plan for everyone's life. For me in particular, I'm one of the lucky ones. It was pretty clear to me early on, you know, from a young age, what my purpose and plan is. And I feel very strongly that is to love God and love others.
Right.
Who are especially who are struggling with mental health issues. So I feel like that's where God has put me. It makes me really sad that a lot of people don't have that clarity. They don't know what their purpose in life is or what they're here for. And so I just, you know, if someone is sitting in my office and they're saying like, I don't know what I'm doing here on earth, why would God put me here? I just do the best that I can to try and help them understand that they do have worth, they do have value, they do have purpose. They might not know what it is yet,
Right.
but it does exist.
Have you found, like, when you're helping people through these struggles and stuff, do you find it difficult sharing, like, where God has this purpose for them, like how God has this purpose for them?
Yes. Professionally, yes, because not everyone who's in my office is Christian.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes it's like so clear to me, like when someone's struggling, I know what they're missing. I know what the answer is,
Right.
but I can't just say, you need Jesus. Like I can't just force that ideology on somebody who's choosing not to believe it, or maybe they've been hurt by Christians or by the church in the past.
Right.
So it's kind of this delicate dance that I do to where I try and earn someone's trust and establish that rapport with somebody.
Right.
And then along the way, if I feel like, you know, they're open to that kind of discussion about Christianity or about my faith, then you know, I'll kind of go down that path with them.
So Psalm 139 says that God recorded every day of our lives. So what do you think God's purpose for you, like, today is?
Like specifically today?
Yeah.
Well, coming here and meeting with you and talking to you and answering your questions. And I mean, ultimately, I just feel like every day my purpose is to share the hope that I have with the people that are around me and do the best that I can to encourage people, because a lot of people are hopeless,
Right.
and they are lost, and they are really struggling for answers. And I feel like I have the answers. And so I just want to do whatever I can to spread that.
Right. And I especially think like with COVID happening today, just shutting people
Yes.
in, like that didn't help any of that mental
Right,
illness whatsoever.
right. We, as human beings, we're just not wired to live the way that we have been living. We're
Right.
wired for connection and to be with one another. We thrive off of being with one another. And this whole COVID thing has just screwed that up. And I completely understand the reasoning for it, and I support all of the social distancing guidelines. I think that they are necessary, but I think that everyone's mental health has suffered to a certain degree. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the day when we don't have to deal with this anymore, when I can sit a little
Right.
bit closer to you,
Right.
and we can look at people without masks on. One thing that's been really tough for me, the field that I'm in, like psychiatry is the only branch of medicine where my only assessment tool is conversation and looking at someone's facial expression and reading their body language. And I don't have that as much anymore. I didn't have that at all in the beginning, like way back in March and April, everything was
Right.
phone. And I just things felt cold. And so it was really hard for me in the beginning of COVID because I felt completely ineffectual. I couldn't lay eyes on anybody. I felt like I wasn't doing anyone any good. And luckily that's changing. Like things have opened back up, and I see people face to face now, but now I only see them from the eyes up. And so it's still a struggle. But it's getting better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think it means to be God's masterpiece? And what would you say to someone who told you they felt like they were an exception to this?
Like someone who feels that they weren't created in God's image, or God was careless when he created them, maybe.
Right.
I don't know how to answer that. But the verse that comes to mind is the verse that talks about how God is making all things new.
Yeah.
And I try and drive that home with people as much as I can, as much as they're willing to hear that. Like, no matter how you've screwed up in the past, no matter what mistakes you've made, no matter your heartache, there's always hope for a future, because God can take your crap and turn it into something really beautiful.
Right.
And I'm just like living proof of that for sure.
Dealing with anxiety, depression, self-harm, or suicidal thoughts in yourself or someone you care about can be scary.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're comfortable, can you share what you have been afraid of during this time? And then like how does this, like learning about God and his perspective, remove those fears?
Yeah, okay. So this is interesting because I don't know if you know this, but I just finished writing my first book, and I turned it in a couple months ago, and it's all about anxiety and faith.
Yeah.
And the root of anxiety is always fear, right?
Yes.
So fear, worry, dread, uncertainty in the future. We don't know what the future holds. What if it's something really terrible? Our mind always goes to like the worst case scenario.
Right.
So I try to remember the history of things. I try to remember, all those times when I thought the worst case scenario was going to happen, but then it didn't. I try and remind myself of that. One thing I did research a lot was the concept of confirmation bias. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's this phenomenon to where we actually will. So you would think, like, logically, when you're presented with a question or a conundrum, or you have a decision to make, you would think that logically what you would do is look for the evidence and examine it and then make your decision or arrive at your conclusion. But that's actually not what humans do. What we actually do is we set our opinion or our conclusion first, and then we go looking for the evidence to back that up.
Yeah.
And so that's called confirmation bias. And that's so fascinating to me, because just like applying it to myself, if I have already decided I'm an anxious person, I'm always going to be an anxious person, I'm never going to get any better, I'm always going to struggle with this, well then that's probably going to happen.
Right.
Because then I'm going to live my life through that lens. I'm going to constantly be moving about in the world looking for pieces of evidence to support what I already have decided that I believe about myself.
Yeah.
So if you can somehow like dig deep enough within your own set beliefs and reverse those, then that is part of what ultimately changes your outlook on life, and especially if you're struggling with depression or anxiety.
Right. So thank you so much for coming out here
my
and
pleasure.
sharing about this with us. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime.